everyone, and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H, and today, unfortunately, Q is going to be, he's going to have to sit out this week. He's feeling a little under the weather, so we have another Q in his space. This is Thomas Quillfeldt from the, sorry, not Quillfeldt. Pretty close, though, actually. I mean, as far as last names go.
I know. I was really upset when I found out there was someone else with a Q in the crew. I was like, yeah. I'm not unique anymore.
This is Thomas Quillfeldt from the Cane and Rinse stable, rather.
Yes. Hi, guys.
Well, let's give a little bit of background on you. What is your general way in when you're playing video games? What are the types of games you enjoy, and what is your connection to the industry?
I think I'm 35. I started playing when my dad got us playing on the BBC Micro, so I kind of remember really old computer games, not really, really old, but sort of quite old, and Game Boy and consoles during the 90s, and just mainly single player stuff. Never really fell into multiplayer, and just a general gamer. I guess I played quite a lot. And then around 2009 was around the time I got into started working in the music industry, and then also sort of in parallel something awakened in me about the artistic potential of video games. I think I played Flower on PS3, and it was my first kind of indie-ish game that had something different to say that I had personally played. And since then it's been a sort of course of gradually learning more about the video games industry at the same time as working in the music industry, and simultaneously getting more sort of chasing down more interesting gaming experiences, still mostly single player. My favorite game was Final Fantasy VII back in the 90s, and I played Half-Life 2 and some of the obvious console games. But last 10 years, I'd say a sort of pretty boring standard mixture of the sort of famous indie games and Fez and, I don't know, Journey and that kind of thing. And also I still love a big console game, like recently Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Resident Evil 2 and stuff like that. So I'd say my big blind spot was probably multiplayer stuff or very small. And I come to the video games industry mainly, we're working with Laced Records, which puts out video game soundtrack vinyl. Laced started sort of 2015, 2016 with stuff like Enter the Gungeon and Hotline Miami. So, and then a series of Devolver games. And I sort of started work around the time that the Hotline Miami vinyl was shipping. And then in the last 12 months, we've just been absolutely hammering AAA soundtracks like Bloodborne, Devil May Cry 5, Resident Evil remake, and Resident Evil 2 from 1998, and the rest of the Resident Evil series. So I sort of became part of the wider Cane and Rinse network, I think 2018, if I remember. Done a few bits in 2017 before that, and with an angle on games music, that being my primary love, and I guess my main scholastic area of hobbyist research in the last 5 to 10 years.
Perhaps that will inform the type of game that you choose to put forward. I guess we'll see when we come to that, but as a guest, we like to give you the option of whether you would like to pitch first or whether you would like to go kind of second. How do you feel? Do you feel ready to kind of burst right out of the gate, or do you kind of want to see how things are done?
No, definitely burst out of the gate. I guess I'm a burst out of the gate kind of person.
Great. Well, let's get to that then. You can go ahead and start your pitch, and then from there, once you're finished with the overall general idea, then we'll have 10 minutes to kind of workshop it.
Excellent. Okay. So I had a bunch of ideas that I've just scribbled down over the years, none of which are any good, some of which are frankly offensive. So I won't mention those. Some of them are just puns, or half-baked titles. But I guess the one I thought the most about came to me when I had really bad indigestion and I was sort of being kept up at night. And that's sometimes when some of the best ideas come, when you're just, you're in for a 4 a.m. lying there awake. Unfortunately, it's not that original, but it felt cool to me. And just to preface this with the note that I came up with this idea before Sekiro or Ghost of Tsushima had even been announced. So my idea is a sort of part RPG, part procedural narrative thing, part stealth platformer, part character action, and a little bit of immersive sim. So the idea is that for anyone who's played Tenchu, the first level of Tenchu is this sort of fortified town governor's mansion thing. It's a pretty common setting, I guess, for sort of feudal Japan adventures. So a sort of walled town. This might just be the first level, or it might be that the whole game is based in this one location. By day, your character is moving around the town like in Hitman, so nobody's attacking you, you're not in any kind of danger. You're gathering information, you're speaking to people around the town, and you're basically doing planning so that you might carry out a night mission later on. And my idea is there'll be two phases. There'll be like a day phase where you're gathering information, bribing guards, finding out about back doors or trap doors or traps or things, maybe doing some minor kind of fetch quests or ways to assist or get under people's skin to work out what you need to know about the guards, what you need to know about your target, that kind of thing. And then by night it would switch to you actually executing the mission, and it would switch to much more of a Tenchu kind of Mark of the Ninja, Assassin's Creed vibe, where you're in the same town but it's nighttime, so other people have gone to bed but the guards are still up, and you're trying to infiltrate a central secure governor's mansion or something like that. And the goal might be assassination, or it might be to kidnap someone or plant some evidence or steal some treasure. I think that one might actually be procedural to some extent, so that it's not a definite kind of, it's not always you're going in to kill somebody. The idea is that you'd be trying to move in stealth. You're aiming for the smoothest possible infiltration. Actually, when I thought of this game, I was playing this mobile game, Shadow something, and it had this really cool mechanic, lots of wall jumping and stuff like that. So I guess your character would be quite nimble and able to get up various architecture within reason, not like you could just fly straight over the roof. But I'd quite like things to have a lot of weight and consequence. So if you get into a fight, if you're discovered and you get into a fight, I'd quite like the fighting to be quite heavy and weighty and meaningful, and only a few hits is going to take someone down. But also perhaps because it's a stealth-based thing with a kind of objective, I think maybe you could have some kind of rewind timer that built up during the day. So the more preparation you've done, the more rewind meter you get during the night. And if you do muck up or you get discovered, you could just rewind a little bit so that you're sort of back to stealth. And if you do get discovered and your plan is foiled, you have to try and escape alive. That's all you have to do at that point. And if you die, the whole scenario resets. You come back as a new character who might be another member of your clan or your family or something. Several years later, the town has changed. All of the information you gathered the first time round is now no longer relevant, and you have to start the process again. So if you mess up the execution of the actual mission itself, what you want to do is get away alive, so that you the knowledge you gathered during the day means you could try again another night. Or something like that. I'm not quite sure.
All right.
So it's kind of overall a mixture of Hitman 2016, a bit of Assassin's Creed, lots of Tenchu, Mark of the Ninja, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I guess Sekiro and Ghost of Tsushima in part because it's feudal Japan, or maybe feudal Japan is too obvious and done, so maybe it could be somewhere else interesting, Southeast Asia or something like that.
Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and start the clock there, and we have 10 minutes to workshop it. So one of the things that I always like to think about is kind of the risk-reward balance. I know for this type of game, this type of heavily preparation-based game, I always tend to over-prepare, and if I'm given, the amount of time to spend preparing just to make my my next little bit of gameplay that much easier, then I'll go way above and beyond, whether that's grinding in an RPG, or in this case, it looks like there's quite a bit of kind of prep and prep work. You can set the stage before you end up going into the gameplay section. I was thinking of a couple ways to balance that, maybe set some parameters around that. I think the most obvious would be you could always have a time limit. There's a certain number of days until some invasion and you need to assassinate a leader before they go off and pose this threat. Or perhaps there was a pitch that we did fairly early on in the playwright run in which it was kind of a casino heist. You would spend as many days as you want infiltrating the casino, kind of like Ocean's 11 style, and kind of scoping out the cameras and learning the guard patterns and everything. But the more time that you spent there beforehand, the more likely you were to be recognized.
Yes.
And, they would start to get a sense of who you are. So when it came to actual time for execution, then people could pick you out from across the room because you're the person that's been spending so much time in the casino lately. So what kind of limiting factors do we want to put on the game to make sure that people don't just spend months, preparing for a super easy victory at that point?
Yeah, I think that I was just thinking that before you said it, was just that the more like Disco Elysium lately, as I understand it, has a thing where you shouldn't exhaust dialogue options. You shouldn't go into every dialogue tree because it will actually end up with a negative outcome for you. So it kind of forces you to choose. It forces you down different paths whilst also suggesting that no path is quite the right or wrong one. I was also thinking a bit about Rogue Legacy, the idea that you're doing another run and you might have some sort of handicap. So as I say, if you don't get away alive, the idea would be that you come back as a different member of the team, and maybe you have some disadvantage that I was going to say something tropey about maybe you have a disfigurement, but of course that would be not very appropriate. But there could be something about you, or some rumor about you had reached the town in advance, or some randomly chosen disadvantage that you have that meant that, okay, this time round, a certain marketplace people won't talk to you because they think you're a robber, or rumors come to town that someone's come to kind of try and con people out of money. So you might have fewer intelligence gathering mechanisms depending on who the character was that you'd been given. I mean, if you're going to do a period piece with sensitivity, you could go into gender roles and race relations and things like that, but that would be potentially dicey territory. But if handled correctly, could also be important to say something.
Perhaps the I want to say the efficiency, or perhaps the amount of care you give previous missions can affect you going forward. If you execute somebody particularly brutally in an early mission, then you'll have more of a reputation. Maybe people will be kind of like in Metal Gear Solid 5. If you keep shooting people in the head, then guards will start wearing more helmets. And so, maybe there's although it seems to be like saying that, it seems to kind of punish people who aren't as good at the game as those who could execute the kind of hitman, silent assassin type of run. And so presumably it would be rewarding the best players with if they could make it look like an accident and they wouldn't raise the cautions of the other leaders that you're out to assassinate or whatever it is that you're doing. So I'm not sure if that seems like a fair mechanic that would really encourage players who are struggling to do better.
I think there's something to be said for patience being rewarded by a smoother ride. Although of course there's always the type of player, I think myself included, who'd rather be patient and screw themselves out of an interesting gameplay scenario by being so overcautious or so stealthy that it wasn't fun. Yeah, I don't know. I think this. I'd feel like there should be less of an emphasis on it being you, there being one character. I'm quite taken with this Watch Dogs Legion idea of being able to slip into lots of different shoes in terms of how to approach a situation with different skills. And the more I think about it, and the things, I don't even play particularly procedural games at all. I've never vibed with a roguelike or something like that. It's not my bag, but I think if it was presented in the trappings of a kind of expensive single player, maybe even like one of the Clockwork games like Hitman, I guess Dishonored to an extent, then I think I would enjoy just a few variables quite a lot to force me to mix things up. I mean, that is something they're getting towards, even with something like, I can't even remember, I've just played Spider-Man. I can't remember if Spider-Man does this, but just giving you lots of gadgets and tools, but finding interesting ways to force you not to rely on a single method or not to get too comfortable. I know that's what they're talking about with Doom Eternal. We're currently in the hype cycle with that, and I think a lot of the focus for the developers there is about deliberately punishing players, not necessarily for being bad at the skill-based shooty part of it, but for being conservative in terms of only focusing on one tool or one method for getting things done. But how to kind of help less able players in terms of the fighting and stuff, I'm not quite sure. I think I like the idea that they'd done loads of preparation. Mentally, they'd got a good map of the town. Maybe there could be some special map assistance or eagle vision or whatever it is that helps the player use the imagination of the player character in having a map laid out. And if you've learned where guard patterns are, you can pull that up in a kind of eagle vision thing and sort of know in advance where certain security things are going to be. Not entirely sure that, but basically saying you did loads of preparation and you wanted to be patient and stealthy, you'd still have a rewarding experience and get the job done. But also it could be fun to be if you were a speedrunner or you wanted to do it fast and dirty, that could be quite fun as well.
So you also mentioned that there was an aspect of moving from generation to generation instead of just kind of retrying the same scenario twice. A level of procedural generation. I think the first time that I've seen that done was in Infinity Blade, where you'd be playing kind of the child of the person that was the previous adventurer. I know that also is in Rogue Legacy, and it feels like the kind of thing that would have been inherited from early computer video games, but I've just not encountered any of the games in that category that have used something like that. But are there other one of the things I'm always curious about when that comes around is, does the technology evolve, or are there kind of a denotations of a passage of time, or is it just kind of a nice excuse to kind of mix up the guard patterns and such?
No, I think, obviously I'm this would be quite an expensive game to make. I'd quite like them to be able to both have the local townspeople be quite characterful and have relationships with each other and arguments with each other and their neighbors and have colorful personalities, but also it employs something like the Nemesis system to remix all of that. And then if you do come back as another member of your family and it's 10 years later or whatever, 15 years later, that maybe some of the architecture has changed, some of the and how that affects the security of the main compound as well, ages the buildings or something, or something new, a new guard post has been built. And also if there was an old an old stall holder or a middle-aged stall holder, and then you come back 15 years later and they're now an old person, and maybe they still have that grudge with the stall holder next to them, or maybe you can still kind of inconvenience their rival in order that they'll tell you that one of the guards secretly hopes to marry blah blah blah, and you can maybe glean nuggets of information. It'd be quite cool. I mean, I'm asking for too much here, but I quite like the Sherlock Holmes games idea of synthesizing pieces of information to create a new possibility. So it'd be quite cool if you could learn, instead of it's just like mini side quest, okay, now this gate will be unlocked. It could be like mini side quest. Oh, you learn that one of the guards' name is this and he's in love with someone else. And then another piece of information you can learn, oh, she actually loves his buddy, who's also a security guard who works on his same post. And only if you learn those two pieces of information, you could use that to your advantage to maybe stoke up a love rivalry so they start arguing so you can more easily slip past the front gate or something like that.
All right, so we passed the 10-minute mark. Let's go ahead and close that one down. We'll leave it open to the community if they have anything they want to add to it, of course. But for now, we have to give whatever we have a name. So if we have to name this game at where it currently sits in production, what would we title it?
I think Cloak and Dagger for me.
That sounds good, actually. I think that fits nicely.
I don't know if they use daggers in feudal Japan. I don't know if they use daggers in feudal Japan, but like I say, it doesn't necessarily have to be set there.
All right, that will be Cloak and Dagger. And we'll move on to my pitch for today. I'm bringing in a twin-stick space shooter flying through computer code, essentially. And so as you blast enemies, stray bullets could also hit the words in the code, which would break apart just like the Space Invaders barriers. And as words are destroyed, the mechanics that they control within the game would change in response. Ooh. So it's a way of kind of breaking not only the game in kind of a Baba is you kind of way, but also trying to kind of mix that with a more kind of action-oriented space shooter. So I'm going to go ahead and start the clock there.
Well, you say stray bullets, but is there an element of you might deliberately on a run try and break the game in a particular way so that an enemy type didn't have shields or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. There's games like Hack and Slash, which is kind of a Zelda type game in which you can reprogram elements of the environment. I think there's elements of that in the Magic Circle, but games where you can kind of use a graphical representation of the code base to your advantage to try to kind of get the upper hand.
Now, would you want, a la Super Hot or many other games, would you want a kind of overarching story that played with the idea of, oh, you're in a game and you can control the game and that kind of thing? Or would it be a purer arcade experience?
Perhaps. I think there's maybe a certain joy and innocence to framing it kind of like a typical 80s shooter with its own, very simple space war, Star Wars ripoff type of story. And the characters slowly start to realize that, they have strange, inexplicable control over the world, but they can't even really begin to grasp the reasons why this would be happening because they don't know that they're game characters. I don't know. I can go in a lot of different directions with that.
I came across a game a couple of years ago. There was a student game where the whole point was it was a platformer. Started off with 8-bit graphics, and then later levels were 16-bit graphics, and it was supposed to sort of be a love letter to the different eras of platformers going through, and the graphics would upgrade as you went through the game. You could do something like, maybe not going quite as far as a Yoko Taro where you're literally switching gameplay types as you go, but you could switch up. There could be some surprises buried in later levels, where you destroy the right bit of code or you manipulate it in some way that the game radically changes or the color palette inverts or something to really, really mess with you.
Yeah, I think obviously there would be parameters within the code that would affect the graphical presentation as well. I guess another perhaps point of inspiration for this is in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. There's a level that takes place presumably within the console that you are playing it on. And so as you kind of ram your vehicles into different computer components, then parts of the graphical displays would flicker on and off. And so you can affect the colors or the geometry of things. And it was just a little kind of visual gag, but obviously we can go much farther with that. There's certain words that would be advantageous to break. There would be certain words that would be pretty hazardous. You have to really avoid shooting the words that display. There could be a phrase that breaks the computer display altogether, and so you'd be playing blind at that point.
Yeah, that would be really fun. How much freedom would the players have to utterly and completely break the game? Like, would a speedrunner be able to quite early on break the code in such a way to make themselves invincible and all of the enemies die in one hit from like the second level to the end of the game?
Perhaps we'd have to think about, probably the most kind of God mode type of settings would have to be buried and really kind of like hidden and well protected from by other things, that would perhaps be, I don't know. I'd have to think about that, but maybe, it would be very dangerous to go for the most advantageous, and maybe they would reset on level changes anyways. And so, it wouldn't be like a long-term solution perhaps.
Or it could be something you have to unlock, something gated, so that you start off with very few options of manipulation available. And then the more adventurous you are at unlocking things, the more adventurous things there are to unlock earlier on. And that sort of, I don't know, Are you thinking a shmup or Geometry Wars style?
I really like the way that Geometry Wars controls, and I think that type of control method is a smarter choice for this one, because you have that really like analog control over exactly where you're shooting. And I think if you're trying to avoid shooting very specific words, you need that level of control. But also, the kind of shmuppy scrolling shooter, I think would fit well as well. So maybe a combination.
So going in and out. Well, maybe if there were shmup sections, those would be more time pressured. If the screen is scrolling, more time pressured for you to work out the most efficient ways to break the code you need to get past this particular level, whereas the more open Geometry Wars sections could be a bit more freeform and a bit more experimental. So for instance, you could start a shmuppy level or a hard laser level and you can't damage the enemies at all, so then you're forced to just kind of bullet hell, keep dodging until you can change the code in the right kind of way. Would it be a funny game, or would it be more Matrixy vibe?
Oh, I'd imagine it would keep somewhat of a light tone, I think, to keep things from getting frustrating, because it feels like it would be so easy to really paint yourself into a corner that you would need to have some level of levity to try to lighten the mood a little bit, keep people from getting frustrated. Yeah,
you could have like a rabbit button that you find, and you're like, right, turn everything into rabbits, or something like that. But then it stops you achieving some other goal, maybe. So how would the actual shooting? I mean, would they literally be bullets? Would it be a game of fewer bullets that you're firing, because you'd need to be a bit more thoughtful about what you're actually hitting, rather than, you hold down the twin stick and it just fires this hundreds and hundreds of...
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't want to... I think that being able to aim without firing, maybe you have to hit a button to fire or hit one of the triggers to fire so that you can aim but not necessarily commit to firing off a shot, because I don't want people to, accidentally destroy a vital piece of code, completely unintentionally aiming for something else. But I do want them to have to be careful about it, and I want it to feel as much like a kind of frantic space shooter as possible. The more authentic this can feel in the veneer of the game that it's trying to be, I think the more effective it will be in the subversion as well.
It might be quite cool to also be able to grab things and move things around, but only in a very special circumstances. So if you didn't want to destroy a piece of code, but you wanted to move it in some way, but then of course you wouldn't be able to fire while you're moving it, and that would put you in danger, and there are sort of gameplay scenarios that could happen around that. But I like the idea of like you seeing a really juicy, it's a bit like the sphere grid in Final Fantasy X or something. You see a really juicy one that you want, but there's a whole lot of stuff in front of it. But of course, if you're destroying that stuff in front of it, you might be so tempted to get that juicy thing, whatever it is, get to it, that you're just like, oh, I'm just going to destroy all this stuff in front of it. But then that radically, you're careless, and then it radically changes the level or the enemies or your own, suddenly your ship goes super slow because you've just kind of greedily blasted your way past something important without... Would it be color-coded, some of this code?
Yeah, because I think that's pretty honest to coding anyways. I think it would make it a lot more readable, but at the same time, real code is color-coded these days within compilers.
And languages, is this a game that would have to just be for English players to a degree and coders?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, we're not actually building the game, so we'd have to make that decision later on in the process. But, I'm not sure what coding looks like in other languages, to be honest.
Well, you could play with it as well. You could make the super, super hard, most challenging levels could have words from mixed up words from different languages. And you'd have to kind of like learn them on the fly. Like you'd see a word that looked like a particular function that you remember from English, but it was in German or something. And you'd have to be, is that the right one? I don't know. You'd have a split-second decision. And would there be, I take it, bosses with the sort of, each one with a gimmick, a code-based gimmick to them?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, as the game goes on, maybe the bosses can kind of get a greater sense of what's going on and start to turn the code against you. And so then you're kind of playing both sides of this metagame.
You might have to defend a particular...
Yeah, potentially. Once they catch on, then that could be a really strong way to go about it. But we're coming up on time, so let's close that down and let's come up with a name for this one.
I mean, there's a cheesy name in something like Data Blast, but that's terrible. Code... I could just think of terrible like Code Apocalypse, and
you could do like Code Breaker, I guess, because you're breaking apart the code of the game.
Yeah. Very good.
I think that'll suffice, anyways. Let's go ahead and call that Code Breaker. Close that one down. Let's move over to the community. This is our third and final pitch of the day, coming from those who have written in. Let's see. Today we have a pitch from Scott F, who wrote into our website, who said, a game where you play as the omnipotent NPC that needs to guide the player, who is now an NPC, in a quest to save the world, essentially playing Zeus from the original God of War. You could also have to stay sufficiently out of sight in order to preserve the NPC player's power fantasy. But if you don't intervene in some way, they'll be too challenged and give up on the quest. You need to provide the NPC player with just enough challenge to feel like they are the only ones in the world that can stop the threat, and avoid making it so easy that they feel like the mission you've sent them on is little more than a side quest. All right, let's go ahead and start the clock on one.
You got to massage the ego of the player. I never played Left 4 Dead, but was there No, there wasn't a mode. Was there a mode where you could set where the zombies were? And I haven't played these games. Dungeon Keeper, the where you're putting down minions.
There's a game on Apple Arcade called Takeshi and Hiroshi, which is a game in which you play a game developer, an aspiring game developer who's working on an adventure game, and he's a high school student or something like that, and then his real kind of young impressionable little brother who looks up to him is really eager to play this game, and the older brother doesn't have the heart to say that he hasn't programmed in vital functions yet, and so essentially he's going to pretend that the game is finished, let the little brother play, and then live program it via a laptop that's hooked up to the iPad that he's playing it on. So you have to
lay the track in front of the train.
Right, exactly. You have to set the enemies that are going to attack the hero and not overwhelm him, but at the same time, give him enough challenge to make it feel rewarding at the end. And so, it's framed with some really lovely kind of stop motion cutscenes in between every level. It's a really cute game. I don't know if I really get on with the gameplay elements that much. It feels a little bit like gambling without knowing all of the information that you need to know, but it's an interesting idea, and I do like this idea of not being the main character and having to remain kind of unnoticed.
I mean, would you be sort of floating around in no clip mode, and you can just fling, a couple of enemies here, a couple of enemies there, bit of an ambush?
Perhaps. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I also like this idea of just being a person in that world and having to kind of like do everything in your power to try to guide the character in a certain way. I mean, there's a certain element of like Lemmings to this as well. If all of the things that you could set in a player's path affects the choices that they make in a predictable way, then you can really specifically funnel them towards a a hopeful, positive outcome.
But if you didn't, if there's something, if you had a particularly, I don't know, cynical or masochistic streak, maybe one of the quote unquote bad ending is that the player comes and you're the final boss, but you have to let them win to fulfill their power fantasy. So you sort of lie there bleeding and dying and be like, oh, I'm so happy.
But putting in enough of a fight to make it feel like they've really earned it.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, there's plenty of, if you took the framing of a God of War, like a uber macho hack and slash, I can see that working. There'd be a lot of opportunities for subtle and unsubtle humor about gaming and gamers and rage quitting and, blaming the input or blaming the enemy placement, that kind of thing. I mean, even more fun might be like a sort of something less hack and slashy and more a slower paced thing like a Dark Souls, where you actually have, because of course God of War, those early God of Wars are so fast and frenetic, whereas a Dark Souls are a bit slower paced. So as if you're playing this character, this godlike character, whatever, you'd have a bit more time to see whether I mean, even just take the frame of Dark Souls and just be able to do on the fly enemy placement could be quite a lot of fun.
Perhaps you have personal relationships with other characters, maybe a character that is a glitch, so to speak, and you have to keep the player from noticing them, otherwise they'll report the glitch and the glitch will be patched out. You have to keep that from happening.
Or you could be a Onion Knight, Siegfried, Siegmeyer from Dark Souls. You could pretend to be an NPC who's kind of just sits in one place, but does appear, at different points in the game. Or like in Toy Story, where the toys are kind of innately programmed to just freeze whenever a human's around. So if the player comes near you, you just have to freeze and then choose the right innocuous dialogue options. I also like the idea, if there are like merchants along the way, if there's a vital key to progress through the game and it's a bit too cheap to buy in the shop, or the player already has the money before they arrive there the first time, you could just get the merchant to bump up the price to give them a bit of an extra challenge. So they have to go off and do an extra fetch quest or grind mission to come back and be able to afford the crest of the three-headed, foot beast and to get through the door.
I think partially relevant here, there's an interesting game called Dr. Lengiskov, the Tiger and the Terribly Cursed Emerald, a whirlwind heist, which came out a number of years ago. I think it's a free download it's almost immeasurably cheap.
I think it was Crow's first game after Stanley Parable.
Right. And so that one, you're playing a player going into a game, but the game is already occupied by another player, and so you have to kind of wait backstage while that player finishes the game, and you can kind of wander all of these kind of behind the curtains areas and kind of see how the game is made, almost like it's a live kind of stage production with props and with lighting and weather cues and stuff like that. It's really cute, but it's a way of kind of demystifying the gaming experience in a way.
No, I liked it a lot. It's very Stanley Parable. I mean, but it was still funny, and I really like their Crows take that meta humor all throughout their email marketing. Their emails are some of the best newsletters I've ever received ever. They're so insanely written, and they break the fourth wall, third wall, second wall, every wall until you don't even know. And they make stupid YouTube videos. You don't even know what's real or what the point of the email is sometimes. So I think it sounds like this game would need to be a fantasy setting, probably like a God of War or a Dark Souls.
I think that makes sense.
Because I think you need to be able to have reverse boss fights, maybe, where if the boss is too hard, you have to whisper in the boss's ear, slow down a little bit, or give them a chance to
Maybe you have to fight the boss yourself to try to kind of weaken it a little bit.
or you have to say to the boss, get stuck behind this gravestone so the player can cheese you for for half your health bar. Or you want to provide more of a challenge, you might want to like stick a thorn in the foot of the dragon to kind of trigger its second, fiery, hellish second phase. There's a lot you could do with that. I'm not quite sure how you move around the world. I mean, do you envisage it as you're a third person character action character, but it's part stealth based. You are trying to stay out of the view of the quote unquote player character.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for the story being told.
That would be a lot of fun. And plenty of opportunities for funny writing.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, the types of kind of standard World of Warcraft quests that you could employ here would be a lot of fun. Yeah, that's right. We're coming up on time anyway, so let's go ahead and move into the titling phase. I mean,
it'd be great to have something behind the scenes, but behind the NPC, or something theatre related, with that idea of being behind the scenes, backstage, but some sort of hint that this is a fantasy epic. Backstage epic.
Or like a non-playable creator, something that kind of fits into that NPC acronym. Non-playable constructor.
The invisible hand. Is that what they call, like a play on the Keynesian economic, right. The invisible hand of the market, but you're the invisible hand.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that fits in with what we're doing. Let's go and call it the invisible hand. And again, thank you, Scott F., for sending that one in. He submitted that to playwrightcast.com/pitch. If you would like to submit a video game idea to us in the future, you can do so by going to that website or emailing us, playwrightcast@gmail.com, or you could even tweet us at playwrightcast. Anyways, we would like to encourage everyone to go over to the Cane and Rinse website, where we have a number of great podcasts, including Cane and Rinse on Mondays, Sound of Play on Wednesdays, this podcast on Thursdays, and then the Sausage Factory on Fridays. And would like to, again, as we always do, thank PROTODOME for the theme song that we use, which is called Hello World, off of the album Blue Noise, plays us in and out every week. TQ, would you like to plug anything that you're doing or draw any attention to any of the projects that you're involved with?
Well, I mean, I work for a commercial company, so it's a bit silly to sort of say, buy Laced Record stuff. You either want it or you don't. You know who we are. We do a blog, mostly about video games music, but I'd love for more people to come and read that. It's a little bit difficult to find. It's lacedrecords.com/blogs/news, or you can just get there through the main lacedrecords.com. And we do interviews with composers. It's not all just based around Lace products. It's all sorts of different things. We just did a listicle that Ryan, you contributed to, about memorable indie game moments, people's favourites from over the years, so which is really fun to put together, and there's lots of different contributors to that. So yeah, I really love people to come and check that out. They can find me on Twitter with a really complicated handle, actually. Given my second name, it's just at T Quillfeldt, which is at TQUILLFELDT, and also at laced_records, and you'll catch a lot of the content we post on there.
Right, well, thanks again for hopping in while our regular queue was sick for the weekend.
No problem.
But anyways, yeah, that will do it for today. To take us out of the show, we'll give a kind of miniature pitch.
This might be one of the more offensive ones, so I won't say anything offensive. How about a fighting game, right? But it's called Holy War, and all the fighting characters are all major religious like prophets and the Buddha and Jesus Christ and all of this. Except
right on.
There's certain religions where you're not supposed to depict things, so I'm not quite sure how that would work.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, then we'll catch you all next week. Thanks for tuning in.